Welcome to today's episode of the Animals at Home podcast. My name is Dillon. Thank you very much for joining me today. A few short housekeeping things before we jump into today's episode. This is the last episode of 2019. This year has absolutely flown by. Whether or not this is your first episode or you've been here the whole time, thank you so much for your support. I deeply, deeply appreciate it. The next episode is scheduled to be published on January 3rd. That would be every 2 weeks I typically publish an episode. However, I'm going to bump that back 1 week. So now there will be a 3-week gap between these next two episodes, and then I'll return to the normal bi-weekly schedule. The reason I'm doing that is to A, give myself a little break during the holidays, and B, I'm finding it very difficult to organize interviews in the holidays. Of course, everybody is busy, and instead of stressing myself out as well as the interviewees that I'm trying to get on the show, I figure I'll just give myself this week break and give the interviewees a week break so we can get through the holidays, and then we'll get back into the sort of normal programming. So to make up for this little gap, today's episode is quite long. It's about an hour and 40 minutes, so it's almost a double episode, or twice as long as a normal episode. And the second thing I'll do is during the first week of January, I do have a solo episode publishing. I've talked about this before on a couple episodes back. I'm very excited about this, and I'm actually going to need your guys' help to promote it and share it. It's more of a New Year's sort of resolution type, very similar to the sort of philosophies and morals that I've been talking about on the show. It's just something that I spent a lot of time putting together, and I'm very excited to share that with you guys, and I'll ask that you guys share it as soon as that's published. So really there won't be a massive break between content because I still will produce something in about 2 weeks, but the normal interviews will not start again until January 10th. So hopefully you guys are okay with that. And again, as we get closer to that launch of the solo episode, I'll absolutely keep you guys in the loop because there's a few other big names that are going to get behind it as well. So again, really excited to share that with you guys. On today's episode of the podcast, I am chatting with Jason Norman of the Reptile Project. Now, as you can tell by the length of the episode, we did cover quite a lot of ground here. We started the conversation discussing Caiman lizard care. If you've ever searched Caiman lizard care guides on YouTube, you've certainly watched one of Jason's videos. We then discussed the reptile education business he's part of, which is Reptile Adventures Utah. He discusses and he tells us all about how they achieved their nonprofit 501c3 status, which is highly important for anybody that has a similar business model. So not only do we discuss how to do it, we also discuss why it's important. And actually currently Reptile Adventures Utah, including Jason and the rest of the team members there, are currently working on building a reptile zoo. So they're in the very preliminary stages of that. So we hear all about those plans. I mean, building a reptile zoo must be one of those dream jobs for many of us, including myself. So that was really interesting listening to how they are going about that. And finally, at the end of the episode, we do deviate away from the reptile world and discuss raptors, or birds of prey. Jason tells me all about his experience as a new falconer. Falconry is something that I knew nothing about, so it was really, really interesting learning about all the different intricacies and how actually falconry functions and how important it is for the ecosystem. Again, if you know nothing about it, you will find that highly interesting. Before I hit play on the episode, I do want to thank Custom Reptile Habitats for sponsoring the episode. Again, as always, there are links in the show notes as well as the YouTube description. Just go check them out. Go check out what they have on their website. There's a ton of different things. There's some brand new cages from Maximum Reptiles on there, which are going to be a game changer in the reptile enclosure business. So definitely go check that out. And again, if you do end up purchasing something, a small commission does get kicked back to me, which does in turn support the show. On to the episode. Well, Jason, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Big fan of your whole show. Listened to quite a few of them. Thought it was really cool. Thought I could have something to contribute.
Yeah, well, you clearly have a ridiculous amount of projects on the go, and I think we can probably extract quite a lot of information from those for other people as well. And it's clear that you have quite a deep passion for working with animals. Do you know where that came from? Did that just kind of appear, or is there a story behind that?
So when I was, I guess where it all started, like I was really young. I think I always just kind of had an interest in animals. I grew up with my mom taking me to the zoo all the time. And so she took me to the lot. And I didn't really have TV channels growing up. But whenever I visited my grandma's house, the channel that was on was either Discovery Channel or Animal Planet. And if it was about snakes, I was there. So I was constantly watching it. I think as a younger child, I was very obsessed with dragons as well. And so I think that just kind of ended up translating to reptiles as well, because that's the closest thing you can get that are actually real. So
That's right. Yeah,
yeah,
actually, I had a similar experience as well. When in my home, we basically didn't have TV. We had one channel or whatever. And when I would go to my grandma's house, it just Discovery Channel the whole time.
yeah, it was just hours and hours and hours of just watching snakes and reptiles.
Yeah.
And Steve Irwin, lots of Steve Irwin. So I mean, he's one of very common hero amongst many of us.
Did you have pets at that time? Did you have any animals?
No, it was a while before I had any animals. Uh, when I was growing up, my first pet was a rat. I kept rats for quite a long time. I think I had about 7 or 8 different rats as I grew up. They were just a fantastic pet to kind of get me started on animal care. I did pretty well with those even at a young age. Once I kind of turned 8, I was able to do a lot more with caring for animals. But prior to that, my dad did most of it. And I kept like guinea pigs as well. They're extremely messy. I preferred the rats.
Yeah, rats are great pets.
Yeah, I think rats are fantastic pets, especially for kids where if they're begging, I want a pet, I want a pet. Well, let's start with a rat. They're easy to care for, and they don't live too long. Also, if you're a snake keeper, reptile keeper, that rat's not going to go to waste if the kid gets too bored.
That's right. Exactly.
So, I mean, I think there's a lot of benefits to the keeping rats as pets. But my very, very first snake, of course, was a ball python. This was before there was a ton of genetic breeding. Like, I think one of the most common that people tended to get was like the like the albino one, and they were like thousands of dollars at the time. And I was 12 when I got him. And it was just a male ball python. I kept it in a 40-gallon breeder, and he's done really well. There was a lot that I learned from him because halfway through, like the first year I had him, he actually got a respiratory infection. And I don't remember if it was he already had it from the get-go or if I happened to cause it, but it was a learning experience. He got through it, and he's still alive today, and he's actually my biggest snake I have. He's a big male. So he's bigger than the females I have.
Oh, that's awesome. So
Yeah,
how long has that been since you've had him?
that was about 13 years ago.
Okay, that's great.
So
Cool.
I still have them. I feel like at this age, when you start getting in your late 20s, normally your first reptile has already passed away at that point. So it's kind of cool that I still have them.
Yeah. Yeah,
He's
I
like
still
my
have my
favorite.
first I still have my first crested gecko. And I've had him since high school as well, and he just keeps
They live.
trucking away.
It's amazing how small they are and how long they can live. So,
It's amazing, yeah.
especially when I start comparing them to like rodents, I feel like they just go so fast.
Yeah, they do. So then so obviously your pet sort of started evolving in some way, and I know that you sort of got gravitated towards the semi-aquatic species. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So I didn't get into any sort of aquatic species or semi-aquatic species until about 4 or 5 years ago, and I had that ball python for a while, all the way up until I was about 22, and then I started getting more snakes, and then I was getting into snakes, and then I kind of thought like, I've never kept a lizard before. I really, really want to keep a lizard. And I was like, I don't want to have a bearded dragon. Everyone has a bearded dragon. And this was also after I started working at my local aquarium in education. And so I had a pretty good base knowledge that I felt. I was also had access to talk to a lot of like the aquarium keepers there, the aquarists there. And for a long time, I started talking, and they had 2 Caiman lizards there, and their names are Juan and Kyle. And I fell in love with their coloration. They looked a little bit like a crocodilian, and I'm like, is this something I could do? Can I try that? And so I started learning a lot more about water quality, keeping that up, everything like that. And I was surprised how much chemistry there was in just keeping something that's aquatic, even when it comes to uh, semi-aquatic lizards. I was very surprised at how much chemistry goes into just making sure water's kept healthy. But I fell in love with these caiman lizards that are at the aquarium, and I decided I wanted one, and I would not recommend a caiman lizard as a first time lizard. I think I got really lucky just because I had contact with the people who were keeping them at a zoological level. So I could bring I had lots of questions. So I was able to bring every question I had to them. If anything was changing in behavior in my lizard, I brought my question right up to the main keeper, and he was able to help me out a lot. So that was extremely helpful having that source.
So how did you acquire that first caiman lizard? They're an amazing species. I've never seen. Actually, I've seen one once in a store, but these are not common.
No, they're not too common. They're becoming more and more common. I see them more and more here in the United States. Maybe it's different in Canada. It very well could be. I know that the majority of caiman lizards come from Peru, and most of them are farm bred. They do not captive breed. I have seen people say, "I got a captive bred one at the expo," and I'm like, "Cool. How much did you pay for it? $300." I'm pretty sure that's not captive bred. so so
Is that all they
sometimes
cost?
sometimes they cost 300, sometimes they cost 500. It'll depend on how plentiful that year was. Um, if you're just ordering them online or getting them straight at an expo, I see them a lot close to $400 recently. Uh, if you buy them online, about 350, sometimes 300. A couple of years ago, I saw them at 300, but now they're getting more expensive just because less eggs are hatching recently. Don't 100% know why. Some years are just more plentiful than others, and the years that they don't have as many, the price goes up. Oh yeah, they're farm bred in Peru, and they're imported here to the United States. So unfortunately, a lot of them uh, do not make it, and a lot of that's due to just the travel time. And most of them contract parasites, and they either die in transit or die at the pet store. Certain pet stores have way better success rates than others, where like 90% or more of their caiman lizards come in, survive, make it through. They're able to get rid of the internal parasites. One of those places is Snake's Sunset, which is actually where I bought mine. Have you ever heard of that place?
Is it Snake Sunset?
Snakes at Sunset.
Snakes at Sunset. No, I've not heard of that.
Yeah, so it's a pet store out in Florida, and they also have an online store. And they did a really good job with their caiman lizards as they come in. They get them treated for parasites. They claim they do a vet checkup. I'm not 100% sure if they do actually do that on every single one of them. Uh, but they at least treat for internal parasites, and they make sure that those lizards are eating before they're sold. I feel like that's one of my biggest frustrations with some pet stores is oftentimes they'll get an animal in and they sell it literally the next day and it has yet to eat. And now the animal's going through another stressful situation. It's going to be even harder for them to eat. So when I contacted him, I said, I want the one that's eating and I want your meanest one. And so and the reason for that was because I wanted to make sure that it was healthy. I wanted to make sure that it was alive, thinking, had a lot of energy. I was like, I could work out through, the aggression or defensiveness, with time. It's no big deal. So I just ordered it from Snakes Sunset, waited for a good time to ship him. He came in. I had custom built my own enclosure. It was a smaller one. It was a 40-gallon tank for his aquatic section, and then above was a 2x4x2 foot enclosure to start him off, and it worked really well. It got him eating and everything like that. Because of the stress of the move, he actually contracted internal parasites again, It's possible they were still there because sometimes if you treat a reptile with canicure to get rid of internal parasites, sometimes they come back, and that was the situation I was having. And thankfully, my lizard would have been dead if I didn't have the resource to be able to talk to the keepers at my aquarium. So several times they were able to help me treat my lizard for parasites and then get him eating again and then get him growing. Started doing really, really well.
What were the symptoms of with the parasite? Was it just not eating, or?
Yeah, that was one of them. Pretty rapid weight loss, not eating, vomiting food is another one. Lethargic, uh, and those are most of the signs. Uh, Small caiman lizards spend a ton of time in the water when they're really young, almost like 80% of their time in the water, uh, and and I think it could depend on the individual caiman lizard. Sometimes it's a little different. And as they get older, they start doing more burrowing like that. And I think that if they're burrowing at an early age and trying to bury and hide themselves, you probably don't have adequate water space. Because when you give them both, adequate of both, they tend to prefer the water. And again, that's not true for every single one of them. Some of them might prefer the soil, and always offering both is the best.
How big did he come in at?
Oh, he came in at probably at 11 inches.
Oh,
I mean, he's
okay.
pretty small, but bigger than what I see most people getting their caiman lizards as. Most people are getting them at like 8. Um, so I'm glad mine was a little bit older so that I could know that he was healthier. I've had several people message me, text me about their caiman lizards not doing well. If you get any animal, I think you always need to be willing to take them to the vet. And with them, I always recommend like, oh, you get them, take them to the vet right away and get them treated for parasites. Like it's not even going to cost you that much. So it's so worth doing.
Yeah, no kidding. And obviously, with the nature of how they get here, they're basically guaranteed to have parasites. So you might as well treat them right away. I, the,
And
I've seen
thankfully,
one. I've seen one caiman lizard in my life, and it was in a pet store in the States, actually. And I was amazed how big it was. I couldn't believe how large they get at full grown size.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
That it's a pretty hefty pet. Like you said, it's not a first pet.
yeah, they can get anywhere between 4 to 5 feet. Most of them don't reach that 5 foot mark, but they kind of range in between there. Females smaller than the males, but yeah, you do eventually need a bigger enclosure. I've upgraded my enclosure, and now it's like a 3 by 6 by 4, and then there's a 150-gallon tank underneath it, and so. And at the moment, I have 3 caiman lizards that actually live in there, which is wonderful about that species. Is they can live together very, very easily, almost like turtles can. And I mean, there's just like this very small handful of species that do this really well, and caiman lizards are one of them. I don't think I've been to a zoo where there's only one caiman enclosure. There's
Right.
always multiple. So how I got the other 2, I didn't even buy them because I started with my first one. I had him for a year, and then I had a friend of mine said, "Hey, I have this caiman lizard. She's not doing very well. I think she would be a lot better in your hand." And I was like, "Okay, well, I just upgraded my caiman lizard to a huge enclosure. Let's put this tiny little one in the old enclosure." And she actually thrived and did really well, and like quadrupled in size in just like 2 or 3 months. So it happened to do really well. And then I had a guy contact me from, I believe it was Minnesota, because he found out that I work with Reptile Adventures, and it's an education, a reptile education group. And he's like, "Hey, I'll donate my caiman lizard because I can't upgrade to a bigger enclosure because I have 2 of them. Would you want them? I'm willing to donate her if you want to just pay for shipping." And I didn't even ask the CEO. I just went, "Done. I will do it." And so and I asked for forgiveness later, and he was actually really happy about the decision. And so now Reptile Ventures itself has its own, of course, that Cayman lizard now belongs to Reptile Ventures. But it's kind of how I ended up with three. I now have one male and two females, and they do just amazing together. It's very interesting. I'm always making sure that I'm checking like their tails, their body. I have to do things like I have to feed separately because they get too um, kind of aggressive when they feed. They're really excited when they eat, so I got to feed them one at a time so they're not fighting each other over food. There's things that I had to adjust to make it work and be safe for them all, but it works really, really well.
So in terms of just basic care of that species, what are some key points? I know their diet is maybe slightly different than people might think, and obviously the size of the cage you've already covered. And then what about like temperatures and humidity and whatnot?
Yeah, so with caiman lizards, their main diet is snails, but you can get away with feeding them other seafoods like shrimp and let's see here, shrimp is one of them, clam tongue, oysters are one of them. Sometimes people try to feed them mussels, but I don't recommend it for whatever reason. When I've tried, um, it like doesn't sit in their stomach well. Especially if you give them too much, they tend to throw it up for some reason. And I'm not sure if it's because they have a hard time digesting what's in mussels or something, but that one you shouldn't. Some people will say, oh, they could do great on ground turkey. Don't do that. You're shortening the lifespan of your caiman lizard. You want to have really, really good. You want to have good water quality. You don't want to have large amounts of ammonia or nitrates in the water. It needs to be a already cycled tank to keep them healthy, and a big tank. They need a lot of area to swim. In 2009, the Jacksonville Zoo actually said, "Oh yeah, caiman lizards live maybe 9 to 11 years." Well, at my local aquarium, we have a caiman lizard that's 27 years old.
Wow.
So they obviously live a lot longer than that. They can
Yeah.
if they're cared for right. And right about that time, we were still learning about the species. Even zoos and aquariums were feeding them ground turkey. They were given maybe streams to kind of soak in. They got space to soak in, but they were kept in a mostly humid or arboreal setup, not really a semi-aquatic. And so I think with the change of now, hey, semi-aquatic, make sure we got the humidity high, humidity around 80 to 90%. Make sure that they have lots of space to swim. Make sure that they're eating mostly snails, getting plenty of UVB, vitamins, any other UV light that they need, and they live a lot longer. So who knew? Giving an animal what they need, it tend to makes them live longer.
Yeah,
So
well, that's it's funny because when you look at that animal, it sure looks like an aquatic animal. It looks a lot like the tail. It looks very similar to a crocodile or an alligator, very tall, and it looks like they're very much built for swimming. So you can
yeah,
imagine that. I'm sure they're great swimmers once they have probably spent tons of time in the tub.
they're they're very fast, super fast swimmers, and they live in warm water, and they need places that they can even hide underwater. So creating parts that kind of are hidden from view, where the top of the water's hidden, and they can kind of hide under that and hang out under the water. Is really good, makes them feel really comfortable. Most of the baby caiman lizards, that's their spot. That's where they want to hang out, is in the water underneath, like a platform. And they tend to only come out when there's like nobody around. and they're like that for almost a year, and then they start kind of exploring more. I think it could also depend on how much exposure you're giving to them. Like if they're in a high traffic area, they're going to get used to that a lot faster, and they'll start coming out sooner. It took a year for mine to stop. I walk into the room and he bolts into the water. It took almost a year for him to get over that. So it takes a while to tame these guys, but if you just stick to it, hold them a lot, they mellow out really, really well. And I think better than I've seen some tegus. So
What do you use for filtration? Is it just basically a canister filter that you find on a pond or something?
so I attempted to use DIY filters. I tried to make my own. It helped me learn a lot about how filtration works, but that comes with a lot of problems. You're more likely to have leaks. Sometimes the pump you use breaks more often. DIY, just overall, it's great. It saves you money. I just feel like it never really lasts as long, or at least in my situation. Maybe I didn't do it totally right. That's fine. So instead, I just went with the FX6 full valve filter, and it filters up to like 400 gallons. And so I do that and clean that out on a weekly basis. And so it's just a giant canister filter. And whenever you start one of these tanks, a lot of people fill up the tank and plug in the filter the day they get their animal. That is not how you want to do it at all. I think you gotta, I don't know if you, because you've been able to talk with a few fish people too. I know you've talked with like Joey.
Yeah, yeah.
I loved that conversation. That was really cool. I don't know if he talked about it, but cycling your tank before you get your animal, before you even, it's true with fish too, but fish and lizards, you want that tank running for like 6 to 8 weeks before you even put an animal in it. And not only running for 6 to 8 weeks, but it should be running with like a couple sword tails in there, because you want a little bit of waste to start happening. You want it to there be a little bit of food rotting in there. That way, beneficial bacteria has something to feed on, and it grows, and then it keeps harmful chemicals from building your aquarium.
Is that how you cycled yours, with swordtails?
Yeah, I use swordtails. They're sturdy. They're really easy. I used a few um, neon tetras as well. So I used the combination of the two, and I have kept fish with them constantly this whole time. I don't think they've ever there's always been fish in there. So I start off with like swordtails, neon tetras, and clown loaches. Had that going for quite a while, and then when I upgraded to the 150-gallon tank, I then got trying to remember their common names when I I remember the scientific names, but not the common names.
Oh yeah.
It was it's Geophagus brasiliensis, but I'm pretty sure it's called a pearl cichlid. Is the common name anyway?
Well, I'm sure people will recognize the scientific
people will probably
name.
recognize,
Yeah.
because I think the Geophagus is a very common scientific name that people use a lot. But there's the pearl cichlid. I got two pearl cichlids, three red stripe earth eaters, a redfin flagtail, and then the last one is a chocolate cichlid. And the Caiman lizards, leave them alone. Occasionally, Caiman lizards will hunt fish or catch a fish, but the fish I have are so large, they're like this big, they can't really physically fit in the Caiman lizard's mouth. So they haven't gone for them, chased them, shown any interest in them.
Right.
But it's really cool that you can kind of keep lizards and then aquatic, and then have these gorgeous South American fish with them, and it looks incredible. It looks amazing. It makes for a good looking enclosure in your home. It looks like you're taking a slice out of the wild.
Yeah. It's for somebody who wants a massive project.
It definitely costs way too much.
Yeah, yeah. It's not cheap.
Yeah, I would love to set it up like a zoo exhibit. Unfortunately, I can give the branches, the substrate. I can give everything they need, but I can't make it look 100% pretty like I want. I hope to do that in the future as we get closer to building our zoo, because I do want to move all three of those Caiman lizards into the zoo. They'll have their own zoo exhibit, even twice the size than I currently have for them, and I'm just super excited for that when that day comes.
Yeah, yeah.
We're not 100% sure when, but
Well, let's talk a little bit about that project, because so obviously you're currently, you work at Reptile Ventures Utah, which is, were you part of the sort of the starting of that, or was that something that you've just become on as a keeper?
So technically that project started 10 years ago, with and the CEO and founder, his name is also Jason, and he started a long time ago with just his personal collection. He started going to just local kids' parties and just showing off animals, doing education. It's kind of what he lived for. He's super passionate. It's been into reptiles since he could remember. And so he started that, and I joined on about 3 years ago. And 3 years ago, he actually worked at the same aquarium that I was working at. And he goes, "Hey, I've got this side project going on. We really want to get this going, and it's just education with reptiles. Would you be interested?" Because he was actually the keeper for the Caiman lizard, so he saw my interest and things like that. And I said, "Heck yeah, I'd love to do something like that." So I started going with them to these educational events, and
This is like traveling education events, like you're bringing animals
yes,
to a school and whatnot.
yeah. So and it was mostly public events. We don't really reach out to schools unless it's an extracurricular event. Um, so like maybe a school fair, a school would hire us to go out and bring animals for them. But at the time we were just doing community events like a harvest festival. We'd be there, and the first for like that first year, we basically did it for free. So we're like, let's get our name out there. Let's show them, what we can do, and we'll come in. They'll choose us over competitors because they're not paying anything. Like, so so we did it for free for like a year, and so I know we talked to nearly staff numbers, but it was like on each event we talked to nearly like 4 to 6 thousand people in that year.
Wow.
Like it was these events were huge, 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 and so
Basically,
many
people
people
just
would
coming
stop,
up to your table and
coming
looking
up
at
to
the
the
animals.
table, looking at animals, asking questions. We do a live show on some of them where we'd go up and there'd be several hundred people in the crowd, and a more formal show like on a stage. Sometimes we would do scheduled shows at our tent or at our table. It was really funny because sometimes there'd be tents everywhere, and you know how like those festivals are where you go to one tent and you go to the next door neighbor's tent and you keep going. Well, a lot of times we weren't that next tent. There'd be like this giant circle of tents, and they're just like, yeah, you go like in the middle, like away from everybody.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or they'd put us like where where nobody else was, which made us stand out. So it always brought a lot of people over, and it was great to have that much room. But I always found it really funny that they were like, "Let's distance you from all the
Yeah,
other."
people are creeped out.
Yeah, I always thought that was very funny. There are a few events where they're just like, "Nah, we'll just put you right next with everybody else." But the majority of the time, they're kind of putting us away.
The classic
Uh,
reptile treatment.
yeah, I guess so. But it ended up working to our benefit because it made us have more room. It helped us stand out more because we'd be there with a ton of huge animals, like just big monitor lizards and Burmese python, reticulated python. And we'd have some of these huge animals. It would have people come over, and then with the big crowd, everybody's like, "What's going on over there?" And then it'd draw in more people, and would actually get really busy. So it kind of worked to our benefit, which is what we really liked. And then the next year, we started charging. We started charging a very, very small amount, but it helped us start saving up to earn our nonprofit status. And that was that took a year to do. Trying to get your nonprofit status, you gotta be patient, and it takes a long time. And so now we are recognized, by the state and federally that we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And this last year, again, we've charged more for each of our shows in order to help save up money to eventually buy a space so that we can start, a small zoo.
Right. Yeah, yeah. So in terms of getting your nonprofit, is it just a ridiculous amount of paperwork? You're just waiting for, to hear back from the government type thing? Or what are some of the challenges with that? Because I know a lot of people, if they own a rescue or something, they want to get this status.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely worth getting. The two things, I mean, it's going to cost you time and it's going to cost you money. It kind of sucks, but you do need to save up in order to apply for it. And there's two ways you can do it. Either you can do it yourself, which takes a lot of time, takes a lot of research because there's a ton that goes into it. There's plenty of YouTube videos out there that talk about how to gain nonprofit status if you really want to go into details. But the easier way is just hiring a lawyer to do it for you, which is the way I recommend. It's a little bit more expensive, but at least it saves you a lot of headache. We decided to go the hard route, and we did it ourselves. And it was long and difficult. I personally did not do most of the work. The CEO did. He was the most motivated and knew exactly what he wanted his business plan. So that's something you need beforehand. You need a business plan. You need a way that you're going to be able to bring in some sort of revenue, even if it is from donations. You need a way to bring in some money, and you should try to start earning or at least saving money using that business beforehand, which is what we were doing during our second year that I was joined. We started charging money so that we can save up for all this paperwork. And you have to kind of go through what is called the Articles of Corporation, and it's kind of like all the steps that you just kind of have to go through. You almost have to say, hey, we want to be nonprofit. Here's why. Here's our business plan. And we have to turn in a 30-page paper stating what our business is, what we do, what we're doing, what our plan is, and the corporation basically checks that and makes sure we're running the business how they want us to run it.
Right.
And so once you turn that in, it costs money to turn that in. It can cost, I mean, it can be pretty expensive. I don't remember the price on that one, but you are looking at hundreds for those hundreds of dollars. And then when you get that back, you're basically recognized as a nonprofit for your state. So we're in the state of Utah. So we got recognized as our nonprofit for the state. And then our next step was to try to get recognized federally, which is the official 501c3. And the application for that, I took notes for this so I could remember everything, because we did it so long ago and it's complicated, and I'm just trying to give the basics so that people understand.
Yeah.
So the application to get our 501c3 was another 25 pages, and that one can cost anywhere between $400 to $800 just to turn in. And if you do not have it right, if you do not have the correct wordings you need, if you do not have it sufficient, they send it back declining it, and then you can rewrite it and turn it back in. But guess what? It's going to cost you another $400, $800 to resubmit it. So you better get it right the first time.
Yeah.
Especially if you're doing it yourself. Which is why I definitely recommend hiring a lawyer, because if you make mistakes and you end up having to resubmit, that's going to end up costing you more money anyway. So that hiring a lawyer is definitely the safer route. I've seen other reptile organizations literally just hire a lawyer, and it went really well for them. And there's a lot of steps in between that kind of happen and go, but it took us almost an entire year just to get that status. And we started almost right when we started earning money, because we're like, okay, we can do this first step. And then we did it, and we waited for a call back while we kind of earned more money. And then, okay, we could do the next step, and we have enough money to do that step. And then we did the next step. And so we did it as we were kind of earning money. That first year we started charging. But thankfully, I think with a little bit of luck, a lot of editing to those, we eventually made it. It was really all thanks to our founder. So he put in most of that work. I was kind of there to mostly be supportive and make sure I was still doing all the shows and all the education.
So in terms of the benefits of having the 501c3, is it just tax breaks and things along those lines that makes it easier for you guys to operate?
So it makes it easier for us to operate because we're tax exempt. is one of the biggest reasons. It makes it easier for us to go about hiring people. It makes it easier for us to receive different sponsorships and grants. It also makes it easier for us to get permits. So here in the state of Utah, it's illegal to own snapping turtles. It's illegal to own crocodilians. Uh, I mean, venomous is kind of off the list as well. Uh, and you need permits for all these. You need permits for birds of prey, and so it makes it easier for us to submit those and get those permits. It's just that each one of those permits again costs another $300 to $500 to just turn in.
Yeah, the government has a great business plan.
Yeah, they definitely do. So it's all about trying to save up, make sure that we um, are timing it right so that we can get the crocodilians that we need, or getting the venomous snakes that we need. We already work closely with companies like the Hutchings Museum. We work with um, uh, we work with Wasatch Snake Removal on the side. They deal a lot with Great Basin rattlesnakes in our area. We do a lot of education on like rattlesnakes and public safety with that. Um, and and so we have some cool opportunities where it's like, hey, we can get raptors in, or we can kind of have a uh, we can have a Gila monster here that we're borrowing from another facility without us technically having the permit yet, or we can even have a rattlesnake on display on occasion, and that greatly depends on where we're doing that as well.
It also legitimizes the business as well. It's one of the things, especially with reptiles, we have so many just bizarre kind of backdoor businesses where you get a guy with a suitcase and a trunk of his car. It's like, I mean, when I talked to Ryan McVeigh, that was one thing that he stressed to everybody that's trying to run and operate a reptile business is get your 501c3. It's an incredible amount of work, but it just solidifies everything and makes it more official.
Yes, it does make it more official, and people trust you more easily. It's so much easier to say, hey, will you donate to this nonprofit? People are like, oh, nonprofit, and they're more willing to donate. I mean, even I have yet to make a dime off of this. It's just part of our passion, because it's us, a group of guys and gals who really want to build a reptile zoo. We really, really want it. And we really think that it can benefit our community, because our community doesn't have an official reptile zoo. It also might be the first official zoological facility, or it might end up being the first nonprofit zoological facility in Utah County. So we're hoping to be quite a few firsts once the zoo's built. But we really just want to change kind of what our community thinks about these animals. Because even here in Utah, a lot of people, they see a snake, they run it over with the lawnmower. They see a snake, they kill it because it's endangering their kids. It doesn't matter if it's a garter snake, racer, rattlesnake, rat snake. It doesn't. they most people just don't know the difference. We just kind of want to change that, and criticizing and yelling doesn't work at all. So, and it can be kind of weird when we're out doing the shows and somebody comes up while you're holding an iguana and they go, "Hey, that tastes like chicken," and you're just kind of like,
Okay.
"You're gonna tell me my animal tastes good? The one that I love and I've kept for years? Something like that." I don't think people tend to realize how rude that is, or that people don't go up to their dog and say something like, "Wow, that would make a great pair of boots."
Yeah.
It's very strange how it's looked at, but we're hoping to change that within our own.
So that's very cool. So tell me about the vision of the actual facility. Like, obviously you guys are still working out major details in terms of location and whatnot, but in sort of a best case scenario, what is this zoo going to look like?
So we want the zoo to kind of, we definitely want it to have enough space to have a variety of species. So the most recent place that we were looking at that we loved the size of, but we ended up deciding not going with it due to the place not being insulated well enough for winter. But we loved the size. It was probably I mean, most of us have probably seen Brian Barczyk's zoo on YouTube.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was about 3 times, the space was about 3 times bigger than that.
Okay, that's pretty
Is
big.
roughly. Yeah, so it was a nice size, and that's roughly the size we're looking for. But if it ends up being smaller, we're willing to start small because every company starts small. Like the aquarium that I worked for a while started out in a van, and then they purchased a spot in the mall, and
A
then
van?
yeah, an aquarium started in a van. Isn't that crazy?
How does that? It's got one fish tank in the back.
Yeah, I mean, well, they would carry around things like horseshoe crabs,
Right.
or a few sturdy saltwater fish and stuff like that. More touchable type aquatic or semi-aquatic creatures, and they use that, for education, and they would travel in a van with aquariums in the back.
That's awesome.
I could only imagine how heavy that would have
Oh
been.
my
Oh
gosh,
my
that's
goodness.
horrible. Yeah. Well, you got to start somewhere, right? So yeah, starting small is no problem.
I mean, that's kind of where we're at right now. Is we're coming to the end of our van stage, if you want to call it, and we're getting into our location stage. I mean, we have a very small location that's just kind of tucked in a corner in the city that we keep a few animals at. Um, but that's it. It's not open to visitors. We don't even want to tell people where it is. So, um, and 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 so we want a place that we can bring people in. We want to give it a kind of jungle safari theme where you got like the almost like that you see in cartoons, like when they move zoo animals, they put them all in wooden crates and they're labeled danger. We kind of want to go with a theme like that. That's really fun and inviting, and we want to do shows. We're even welcoming in birds of prey to all of our programs as well, because we want to educate about local wildlife as well. And here in Utah, birds of prey are a huge, huge, huge part of that ecosystem, and it's something people can go out and see really easily. Most people don't see snakes very often. Maybe they'll see a total of 5 to 10 in their entire life in the wild. Sometimes even less if they live in the city more often. But birds of prey, they're everywhere. And
Definitely.
if you just look up, you'll see one. And you can even use birds of prey to educate about your local, reptile. And so we've been bringing in birds like deer falcons and peregrine falcons, red-tailed hawks, and we've had a goshawk come in for us before. And we're mostly working with local falconers to kind of have access to that.
Yeah, that's the birds of prey are amazing. I definitely want to talk about them. We're gonna get into that in a second. I just want to jump back to the zoo in terms of the visions. Are you guys just going to different reptile zoos and trying to get some ideas and brainstorming? I mean, I imagine it's going to be quite a large price tag on some of these. It's just even in building enclosures.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been saving up. Every enclosure is going to have to be almost all of it's going to have to be built by hand. We've been working on partnerships with other companies that build enclosures that we think would be a good fit. So we've been working with that, and we have been trying to pull inspiration from the way other zoos are designed. Sometimes we'll look at other zoos. I won't mention who because the people who run them are fantastic, and I don't want to bring them down whatsoever. But there've been a few where we get in there and we're like, yeah, we don't want it to look anything like this idiot.
Yeah, well, it's important to know that too.
Yeah, and I mean, like sometimes it'll look great on camera, and then you actually get there and you're like,
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's very interesting. And then some places they don't look good on camera, and then you go there and you're like, incredible. How did you
Yeah,
build something like this? Uh, and we've been able to get lots of advice as well from a lot of the people who worked at this aquarium, and because a lot of them were there when it first started too, and so we're like, how did you start? What did you do? How did you go through this process, and what do you think of this? And so having those resources are really helpful, which is something I'd probably recommend as well. If you want to start a nonprofit, start getting real life resources. I mean, it can be difficult, but finding a mentor that's willing to answer questions at least within 24 hours is huge to help out your, nonprofit, business that you're wanting to do with animals. Because you're going to have a lot of questions. It just will happen.
And you can make a lot of mistakes if you don't have someone to bounce ideas off
Yeah.
of.
Yeah. And so I feel like we've been extremely fortunate. For me personally, having the resource of many zookeepers to be able to talk to, along with having the resource of just even other business-minded people within the aquarium too, who've been able to shoot advice at us every now and then. So it's been wonderful. They've been a huge blessing, and I don't know, it's just all been wonderful. Like as it's going, it always goes a lot slower than you want it to, but
Of course, yeah.
it's all been it's hasn't been taking any steps back, which is a good thing.
In terms of, is this something that you're able to get AZA certified, or does it have to be AZA to do something like this, or what are the rules kind of around that? So
an AZA facility does have to be of a certain size. They also have to have a certain amount of visitors each year. So zoos and aquariums keep track of how many visitors they're having on a daily basis. Also, how many people you're educating too. So AZA facilities keep track of all of those. And it's a long process to apply for AZA, and it also could take years. So with our small zoo, it is not something that we'd be able to look into right away. This would have to be something once we're much larger and far more established that we can look into getting AZA certified. But there are other certifications out there that work for other smaller zoos that we are thinking of looking into. We just haven't done it yet. First, we need the facility, and then we can start working on those certifications.
Right. Well, it sounds like an intense project, but I'm sure it will be very rewarding when it's done. Are there places that people can go to support it directly right now?
Yeah, absolutely. If you visit reptileadventures.org, so it's pretty simple. Right when you go to that page, there's a little donate button right at the very top, and you can click that and donate $5. It's like an easy, fast way for us to accept donations. And we have run campaigns in the past, like we did a t-shirt sales campaign that did decently well. It was our first one we ever tried, and it went pretty well. And we were able to save a little bit of that. And but that's the easiest way to support. If you also want to support, you can follow the social media pages. So it's going to be, so if you look up Utah's Reptile Ventures on Instagram or Facebook, we're going to be there. We've been anticipating starting a YouTube channel for like a while, and we've only got one video up there. And unfortunately, we're just, we're spread so thin that it's hard to find time to make videos for my channel and theirs, and take care of our animals, and for me to practice falconry and move, and I have a baby on the way.
Oh my gosh.
So it's like,
oh my gosh, you're about to get the most advanced pet.
Yeah, I know. I'm about to get the most expensive, most advanced. It's already costed more than any of my pets I've ever had. So
yeah, I know it's probably a rude awakening, but it's
probably the best one out there.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. In terms of in timeline, are you guys hoping like 2021 type thing?
So we are hopeful for 2021. Our first hope was to have something up by 2020. And when we were looking at, that was if a particular partnership was going to work. And unfortunately that one, they had to step back for now. We didn't have to pull out completely, but, that partnership might have to wait. But we are hoping for 2020. This year will be another year of where we're just trying to earn as much as we possibly can, because especially the more money that we have now, the less we're going to have to pay in the future. And it's going to have to be run by volunteers, strictly volunteers, until, it's sustaining itself.
Yeah. Right.
So, I mean, I'm willing to do it, but hopefully we have enough people willing to do volunteer. It doesn't seem too hard to find enough volunteers. It just seems like each person has a very limited amount of time that they can donate, and so that's kind of the tough part. Normally, when you do volunteers, you have a lot of volunteers that work like 4 or 5 hours a week at the most. So
Right. Yeah. So
so
you're managing a lot of different people.
yeah, you're managing a ton of different people.
Yeah, that's. I mean, building a zoo. There's nothing better than that for most animal lovers. So that's great. So let's jump into the falconry because this is another kind of very different. I mean, I don't think it. I think most people would recognize what that is, but they probably have no idea about it. And I'm kind of one of those people. So tell me how you got into this and sort of what it is in general.
Yeah. Have you had a falconer on your podcast yet? I'm not
No, I
sure if
have
you
not.
have.
No.
Okay. So I am pretty new to falconry. I am by no means an expert. I just wanted to kind of make that clear right from the beginning. Uh, but I have been into birds of prey for a while. So, uh, and thankfully, my previous experience with reptiles did prepare me to end up keeping a hawk. Eventually at the very end. Anyway, how I got started, because we typically start with that. I got started when a friend of mine who joined Reptile Adventures started volunteering with Reptile Adventures, and he's like, "Hey, I'm a falconer." And at the time, to me, I thought that was like, "Oh, you keep birds of prey? That's cool. Can we like do a video with one sometime? Like that would be really fun." So, and this was like when I first started my YouTube, and so he brought the bird over. We did like a YouTube video, and I was able to meet this gorgeous deer falcon. Um, and most of the time, deer falcons don't come this far south to Utah. It's pretty rare. I mean, they're up in Montana and Canada, and they're just such amazing, gorgeous birds, and they love, love, love cold weather, and they can tolerate like negative 30 degrees and will still hunt in it. And anyway, they're crazy, crazy falcons, and they're the world's largest species. So there's a lot of really cool things about meeting him, and I kind of fell in love. And his name's Jupiter. I fell in love with Jupiter. I thought, so cool, and I was like, how do I get one? So I was like, I want it, and so it was just really cool. And I didn't really ask so much on how he gets his birds. I was just kind of asking more of like, what do you do to care for him? What do you keep him in, and stuff like that. And then a few weeks later, I had him come to my house again, and he, I had my sister over, and she's huge into birds, and so I was like, hey, can you bring your deer falcon over for my sister? And he's like, yeah, no problem, that'd be really fun. So brought it over again, and this is when I started asking more about how they do falconry, and so I started asking like, how do you get involved? What do you do with the bird? At this point, and he's like, and I was like, can you keep owls? Like he's like, yeah, you can do owls and stuff. And so at this point, I still thought it was mostly just keeping one as a pet, and I understood it would be a very different pet. It's not a pet that would go into my house and stuff, and I knew that you had to get permits for, and by the government, they're not labeled as pets. And so then I started doing more research on falconry, and I kind of found out falconry is practicing or keeping a bird of prey and hunting wild game. And that like blew my mind. I thought the only thing that people really did with them was like abatement, like fly your bird around a farmland so that it keeps pests away. And that's what I thought falconry was. But then when I learned that it was like the whole sport, and there's like thousands of people doing this all the time, and that is incredible. This bird flies away from you and then it comes back. Like
Yeah.
what? Blew my mind. And I would sometimes when people get to that point and they're like, oh, I have to take it out hunting. Oh, I have to train it. Oh, I can't keep it inside my house. I don't want to do it. But like that just made me go more like, I want to do this even more. Like it got even better. I was like, okay. And I kind of found out, oh, owls don't make very good falconry birds. Most people start off with like red-tailed hawks or American kestrels, and so I started looking into it. I had the steps that I had to take in order to eventually get my license. Was first I had to go to my local division of wildlife resources or your division of natural resources, and I had to take a test. And it's about mine was about 200 questions. It'll vary from state to state. It probably is a little different in Canada as well. Um, I don't know if the process is the same. I do know they practice falconry in Canada, but I don't know the process. But this is what it is for the United States. Um, so you go, you take that test. You have 4 chances to pass in a calendar year, and it took me twice to pass that test. So I passed that test, and then you have to build your facilities. And your facilities have to follow certain type of guidelines. They'll send you those guidelines and let you know what those guidelines are. And so you start building those facilities. Some of them are like, it's got to have a roof. It's the windows have to have poles that are vertical. No wires. It has to have perches that are covered either in astroturf carpeting or rope. Yeah, just different things like that. It's got to have a certain type of substrate. Anyway, so I built mine in 8 foot by 8 foot by 7 foot, and I was preparing for a red-tailed hawk. And then you also have to get a sponsor, and your sponsor acts as your mentor. So you have to either go to your local falconry club or local falconry Facebook page, start asking around, find somebody local that can show you stuff. And when I started finding some of these local people, they took me out hunting. So I was able to go out and hunt with some Harris hawks. I was able to go out and observe hunting with red-tailed hawks and prairie falcons, and it was all incredible. And I really gravitated more towards the Harris hawks and the red tails, and so I wanted to do hawks. So I built the facility to do hawks. I found a sponsor to help be my mentor, and then once you get your facilities approved, your mentor sends in a letter. You go back to your DNR and you get your certificate of registration, and you also get your very first capture permit to capture your first wild bird. So you actually have to go out and capture a bird from the wild. You cannot capture a bird that is older than a year, but it also has to be old enough to have left the nest. So there's kind of this in between. So basically, they got to be over 4 months old, but under a year. So you got 8 months that you can capture this raptor, roughly. So I actually caught mine on October 5th, kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and that was pretty crazy. It was really fun. That's the process that I went through in order to start.
So okay, wow. So I knew none of that.
Sorry. I know it's a lot of explaining. I'm sorry if I'm talking too much.
No. That's why you're here. No, that's good. So I have some questions about that. It sounds like almost like an antiquated or almost an old system in a way. Like I had no idea that you actually had to go out and catch wild. I'm surprised that the animal activist people haven't been on this more, but they probably have like a really good.
They have been, but there's a few reasons why it stays. Because that sounds really wrong. I go out and I literally take a bird from the wild. I'm essentially taking away its freedom. That is what I'm really doing. I won't deny that. And that does feel very wrong, especially in today's kind of age. You got that kind of woke culture and leave animals be. There's kind of this fantasy about it. But then at the same time, they're still willing to, support things that destroy public lands. A little bit of a hypocritical culture, if you will. But falconry, when capturing a wild bird, or me going out and capturing the wild bird, does not affect or negatively affect wild populations in any way. It has no measurable effect. So I know that me taking that one isn't going to somehow harm the rest of the environment. There's just not enough of it going on to make that harmful. Because there really aren't. There's only several hundred falconers here in Utah. There aren't that many, and not all of them are capturing birds every year. Sometimes there's some birds you can only get captive bred. So like Harris hawks, you can get them captive bred. They're not local here. A lot of people get their prairie falcons captive bred. Um, Sometimes people get their peregrine falcons captive bred, but they can also take them out of the wild too. You just have to have more specific and special permits for peregrine falcons. But there is a variety of ways to get your bird, but the kind of the most simple way almost every apprentice gets their first bird is capturing a red-tailed hawk from the wild or capturing an American kestrel from the wild. That's really common.
So then what is the falconry, the sort of the association? What would they argue against, like the reason to keep it and like keep this thriving as a it's more than a hobby, I'm sure. A hobby is probably too small of a word, but so what do you guys say when you have to fight up against people that say, why are you doing this?
So it's almost like your own miniature conservation effort. So all birds of prey, they have a 20% chance of making it through their first winter. Their survival rate is extremely low. 80% of raptors die within their first year. And it's usually it's either because of illness, parasites, or the number one cause is starvation. Most of them just starve to death. And it's very, very unfortunate that happens. But and the reason that typically happens is because they're unwilling to catch larger game. Because during the spring, summer and fall, they're catching things like mice and snakes. They're catching things that are really small. And if they do not adapt to hunting something larger, like in a lot of parts of the world, if they're not hunting squirrels, which are very difficult to catch, if they're not hunting rabbits, also very difficult to catch, then they starve to death. And most of the time they're not willing to do that. They're either too afraid, they don't have the confidence, they don't know how. Some of them they'll try and then they'll fail, and hawks are a little mopey though. And they're kind of like, oh, I guess I didn't catch it. I'll never try that again. Or they kind of go, why waste the energy trying to chase after rabbits when I can't catch them? But the only thing available is rabbits. And so a lot of them starve to death. So if I go out, capture one that's under a year old, I can give him everything he needs: shelter, food, water. I can train him to hunt rabbits successfully. So that way he knows and has lots of experience hunting rabbits, because really all it takes is them getting the experience. Once they kind of have that know-how, they're really good at catching rabbits and killing them too. And so I teach him to hunt those. And then in either a year or 3 years, maybe closer to when they become sexually mature, I release that animal. And now, instead of having the 20% chance of survival, he now has an 80% chance of surviving, as well as if I wait till maybe 3 or 4 years down the road of releasing him, then he also has a chance to breed, a higher chance to breed and mate with the rest of his population. So, I mean, even if you keep that take that a step further, whereas 20% of birds of prey make it through the first winter, only 5% make it past 5 years. So it's such a low survival rate that capturing and releasing these local birds is actually helping.
Which is, I mean, it makes total sense. It kind of reminds me of, some of the best conservation efforts on this continent are done by hunting associations, groups that are just making sure populations stay healthy and the land stays clean. And you have people that say, why are you hunting? It's not fair. But they can show all this land that they protected. So I didn't even realize it was a catch and release scenario with these birds. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. There are some people that just fall in love with their bird and they'll keep them for years and years and years. And every time I go out with my hawk, he's free flying. If he wants to, he could fly away and never return.
Right.
Like he can choose to do that if he really wants to. But we've created a relationship where he trusts that I'm going to feed him. no matter what happens, he's going to get fed. He's going to have shelter. He's going to be warm. He's going to have all his needs. And so sometimes he might fly up into a tree for a while because, heck, he enjoys it. He's a hawk. It's what he's supposed to do. But eventually he does fly back. And we're able to go home that day after hunting, that morning. And so all these birds of prey, they have chances to fly away, and they do. There are quite a few birds of prey that falconers take out, and one day their bird just decides to take off, and that's okay. That's part of the sport. Now, if you are flying something that isn't local, like a Harris hawk, trying to think of another. There's some species of falcons as well that people are flying that aren't local. You have to have either telemetry or GPS tracker on them so that you can get back your bird, because that bird that's not local is either just going to suffer out in the wild, or it could end up creating hybrid species. Or in Europe, they're actually having problems like having like hundreds, thousands of Harris hawks that are reproducing in the wild that are now more of a pest because, falconry birds got away from them, and then they couldn't get them back. And so that typically doesn't happen here very often, because normally it's too cold in the winter to have like warmer weather birds survive here too. But because we also require either GPS telemetry, people are almost always able to get their bird back. And so we don't really have an invasive bird or an invasive raptor problem here, which is really nice. Thankfully.
So is that almost how the release always goes? It's just sort of one day the bird doesn't come back and you go, okay, on to the next one type thing? Or is it normally like a planned, like today I'm going to try to release them back into the wild?
Most of the time it's planned. Sometimes they do just fly away, and that's what you got to accept. And they do have equipment on them, but it's always made of leather. So eventually they pick it off or it rots off. But a lot of times it's planned. And I mean, if you just flew your bird up into a tree and left, your bird would actually still follow you if it's a really attached bird. So normally a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll give them a nice big meal, or they'll spend time really fattening them up, and they'll put a lot of weight on them, and then they'll go out to a field, give them one last big meal, and then just kind of leave. And then now that they're fat, they're going to live a little bit longer. They're going to have a lot more time to find food before their weight starts dropping dramatically. And they kind of revert back to a lot of their wild behaviors. And now that they have the experience of for falcons maybe hunting sage grouse or ducks, or hawks, now they can hunt rabbits. They're going to have a much easier time getting food that winter.
Right. How did you catch it? What is the process of catching a hawk?
So catching a hawk is frustrating. You need a lot of luck because it's not like you can go, hey, I want that hawk, and you just net it or something. Like, you can't do that. First of all, the hawk's got to be hungry. So it seems like the most successful times tend to be right in the fall, when food starts hiding underground. So when they start seeing less food around. Use a trap that's called a BC trap. It's basically a wire cage. It's a wire cage, maybe about this big, and it's got a ton of little slip knot loops on it. And you put a couple gerbils in that cage. And as you're driving down the road, you see a hawk. You go, oh, hey, there's one. And yep, it is a juvenile. All right. And so you slow the car down, you open the door and just chuck the trap out the window at the door.
Wow.
And then you sit there and watch the hawk and hope the hawk comes down, foots and plays with the trap, trying to get to those gerbils, and then gets a talon snared in one of those hoops. I will say, though, it is highly illegal to do that without a permit. You can face very heavy fines and even jail time for even attempting to capture a hawk without a capture permit, and that's even as a falconer. So even if you are a falconer and you capture something, and if you don't have a capture permit, you can still face very, very hefty fines.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you can't just go throw your gerbil trap out the window.
Yeah, you can't throw a gerbil trap out the window. And the reason why I'm open about saying like how that's done is because you could literally look on YouTube and find many videos. If somebody wants to know, they're gonna find it anyways. So, but I like to include that it's highly. If you want to do this, get the permits.
Yeah, exactly.
And most of the time, if they're just wanting to, that person's wanting to do it just to keep it as a pet, the process of getting those permits typically stops those people.
Yeah. So yeah, there's enough regulation and red tape in between the two stuff, starting in the finish line, that it's going to weed out the people that aren't there for the right purpose. So when you caught the hawk, I mean, you must have been incredibly excited.
Very thrilling.
Yeah,
It's
but
very,
probably scared as well.
oh, it's so cool. So my hawk, I threw it out. He came down once, and it was like right next to a road. And so every time a car drove by, it would scare him back up. So I was like frustrated about it, but at least grateful about it at the same time, because if a car drove by and he didn't fly away, that meant he was stuck, and but he came down nearly 6 times to this trap trying to get these gerbils, and each time a car scared him away. And then finally, a couple cars drove by, and I saw some wings in the air because it wasn't quite visible. And so I was like, I think he's caught. So we drive up, and there he is, wings sprawled out, and he's caught in this trap. And so we get out, and I've been volunteering at Great Basin Wildlife Rescue for a while at this point, so I already have some raptor experience. That way I can handle them safely as well, which is another thing I recommend if you want to get into birds of prey at all. First, try volunteering at your local, animal rescue, because they're going to have a lot of raptors there. And you can gain experience on how to handle them safely and all those situations. You can learn different things to do for their health and all that stuff. Anyway, we get there. I am able to pick them up properly. I wrap them in a towel, and even one Native guy, a Native American guy, drives by, and he's like, "What you guys doing?" And I chatted with him. I was like, "Oh, I'm a falconer. I'm catching my bird, and hopefully eventually we'll release him." And he was really nice, and he's like, "That is really awesome. Well, I hope you release him here someday." I was like, "Oh, I will."
Awesome.
Yeah, so he was nice, and then he drove off, and so I brought it to my sponsor's house. We found out that he was a male red-tailed hawk. We got anklets on him. We got jesses on him. And then we treated him for any sort of bugs or mites. It's just kind of like a spray that you spray him down. And then I started the taming process, it's not called taming for a falconry, it's called manning, because they don't really get tame. They just become used to people. So there's kind of a difference. Like they tolerate, and it just makes them not afraid, but they're not tame.
Right. So in terms of when you're doing that process, is the bird like visibly freaking out when you're, putting anklets and everything? It's just, just have to keep it contained type thing?
Yeah, normally if you just cover their head, they stay pretty calm. They're so visually stimulated that whatever they see can scare them or freak them out. I mean, these animals are processing information, visual information going from their eyes to their brain to how they react about 5 times faster than ours do.
Wow.
So it's very fast. I think falcons react a little bit faster than hawks do. I think they process the information a little bit quicker. So I think hawks are closer to more like 3 times faster than us. Than like peregrine falcons, it's like 5 to 6 times faster than us. So they're extremely visually stimulated. And so if you hide their eyes, you may have seen people put hoods on their birds to keep them calm. Sometimes people do that. I don't hood my red-tailed hawk because most of the time red-tailed hawks don't get it, because they typically chill out pretty well. But I was just covering it with a towel and put all that equipment on. And then when I'm manning him, normally you want to put him in their enclosure that you built, the facilities that you built, and that's called a mew or a muse. I'm unclear on whether some people call it a muse, some people call it a muse. I don't know. But you put them in the muse and you hang out with them for as much as you possibly can. Heck, sit down and read them Lord of the Rings. I mean, I don't Like you just want to spend time with that bird. My bird was kind of flipping out a lot when I first brought him home, and he was jumping up and hitting his head on the ceiling. And so every time I came in, I'm like, this is not safe for him and I to be in the same room. So I changed my strategy to a less traditional strategy, a less preferable strategy, but it still worked. Instead, I was able to get him. I put him on his anklet. I got him on his jesses, and I held him on my fist. And that first day, I held my fist all the way until it just got dark. And I talked to him. I just said things, read things. I watched Netflix, like just outside.
So is he trying? Does he try to? Does he get aggressive? And like, obviously, he's attached to your arm at that point. He
Yeah,
can still like peck
either
you,
he's
or
gripping really, really hard with my glove, or he's trying to fly away. And they're pretty strong. Normally, when you just fly, you just kind of hold up, and then eventually they learn how to correct themselves and get back onto your fist. But at the beginning, you kind of have to help them up. You kind of push their back right up, kind of pushing their back right up, and then you get them back on your fist, and they'll sit there for a while. They'll probably bait again, and so I did that for a while. It's kind of the more forceful way. Like if we compared it to reptiles, it's like when you tame a monitor lizard, you could either do it by like slowly gaining its trust and offering foods and letting it come to you, which I honestly think is the better way. And I've done it that way. But then there's also the more forceful approach, just trying to grab your animal as calmly as possible and then just holding it constantly. And I think both ways work. The end result, I honestly don't see a difference. Maybe other people do, but the end result, I don't. I think with birds, you'll have a very different end result, but I think with reptiles, you don't see that nearly. Uh, but so I used the more forceful approach. Thankfully, it worked. He ate for me the next morning. Once they start eating for you, that's kind of a go on flight training the next day. So the next day,
really, wow,
yeah. So the next day, I held out my fist with a little tidbit of food, and I gave it to him so he could just take it right out and eat it. And then I put another tidbit a little bit further. So then he would have to at least put 1 foot forward onto my glove and take the tidbit. And so then he would do that. And then we progressed to a hop. And then I got further back to a jump, to a leap. And then he's flying, a few feet. And then you kind of end the day there. And then the next day you start, increasing that distance. You double your distance every day till you're reaching around 150 to 200 feet. That can take almost a week, maybe, to get to that point. Sometimes a week and a half. It'll all depend on your bird. Thankfully, mine progressed extremely fast. He was really chill. By the second day, my bird was letting me touch him, which is very weird. My sponsor kept saying, "What is wrong with your bird? Is he sick? Is he okay?" Like, oh, he's pretty sure he's fine. So my bird lets me touch him and almost kind of do anything with him. He has a very mellow personality. And then my other friend has a red-tailed hawk that's extremely aggressive. You put your hand close and he'll just grab you with his talons.
Does that hurt? Like,
it hurts a lot.
Does it? Yeah.
Yeah, I had a goshawk. I was holding a goshawk, and I got too tempted and wanted to touch it. and this was like when I first started looking at it. This is the first goshawk I ever held. I got my hand close, immediately grabs my hand, and I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's awful. And you just have to hold there and wait for them to finally let go of your hand.
It's like their grip strength and spiky nails.
Yeah, and that went right through my hand. And so, I mean, it healed just fine, but it's just kind of like I learned, like, oh, you don't know the bird, don't your hand.
So the talons actually sank into your skin?
Yeah, they did. It hurt a lot. And their bites aren't that bad. It's their talons that suck. The bites, honestly, really are in nothing comparison to their powerful feet.
I'm amazed at how quickly, what do you say? Like, oh, it might take a week and a half. Like, I'm amazed that you can train a wild bird in a week and a half to
just fly to your fist. Yeah, and then it takes about another 2 weeks, maybe. Again, there's so many variables that will factor into this. For me, it took longer because of a stranger reason. But then you start training them to come to a lure, and a lure is like a little, it looks like a rabbit. It's meant to look like what you want them to eat or chase. Like when you go fishing and you use a lure, that lure is going to look like what those fish eat. So same principle. Use the lure and you hide the lure and you just kind of put them on a perch and then you kind of pull the lure out. Typically they'll see it and they're unsure about it. And eventually they will commit to it and grab it and hold on to it. Even if they like fly next to it and then commit, you just want to get them to at least commit the first time. And then you give them a ton of food, make sure they feel really rewarded. And then you keep progressing from there. And then you start pulling the lure faster. And then you kind of lower the amount of the reward for when they catch it. And then you do it again and again. And so then almost for a week, you're doing this lure training. And then you start basically free flying them and taking them out to the field. Once they're willing to fly to that lure and you're able to do a successful trade-off, giving them food and taking the lure, they're almost at that time where they're ready to free fly. You'll have to talk with your sponsor to make sure that you're doing the right time. But I had to wait because when I came to the end of our lure training, something happened and my bird sprained his wing. And so I had to wait an additional 3 weeks while his wing healed. He couldn't even use it. Right? Yeah, it was his right wing. He couldn't use his right wing at all. He had sprained it or pulled a muscle. Thank goodness it wasn't broken because that would have been months. And so I had to wait for that. And then we kind of had to start with lure training again. And then I started taking him out to the field to hunt rabbits. And it took me about 2 additional weeks for him to finally catch his first wild rabbit. And that was such an amazing moment. It just happened on Thanksgiving Day. So I was like, yes, I was very excited.
That's so does he, when he catches it, does he instinctively eat it right away?
Yeah, typically they'll start like plucking it and stuff. I try to get there as fast as possible. So he catches something. Normally the rabbit's screaming because it's in pain. And so I have to run up there and kind of dispose of the rabbit in any way that I can. There's a few ways that I know how because I've gone hunting a lot in the past that can kill a rabbit very quickly without having to shoot it again. I think that's one mistake a lot of hunters make is they'll shoot a rabbit and the rabbit's still alive and then they'll just shoot it again in the head. Like that's a waste of a bullet and you could get yourself hurt by shooting the ground that close.
Yeah,
and
exactly. Yeah.
I'm like, there's so many things that can go wrong with that. Like, so I try to dispatch the rabbit as quickly as possible. I let him kind of pluck it and eat a little bit of it, and then I trade. I offer him some tidbits, like a good amount of tidbits. Throw that on the floor. I hold the rabbit. He'll hop off, eat those. While he's distracted, I'll pull up and hide the rabbit. And then when he's all done eating, he starts looking around. He's like, all right, I guess I got everything. And then he starts looking up at me. He's like, all right, let's go. Next thing.
And then he's ready to go again?
Yeah, he's ready to go again. And he's been free flying for several weeks now. Comes back every time. It's pretty amazing. Sometimes he'll fly up into a tree and he'll want to hang out there for a bit. We'll walk around the tree, try to see if we can flush rabbits around there. Nothing happens for a little bit. And then he'll be like, all right, I guess there's nothing to do here. And then he'll just fly back down, land on my fist. I don't have to call him with food or anything.
Wow, that's so crazy.
Comes back.
So in terms of can you utilize the rabbit later, the dead rabbit? Can you use it as food?
Absolutely.
Or is it, so you take it home and you use it as tidbits?
Mm-hmm. Take it home, use it as tidbits. I also use wild caught starlings. So I have a starling trap. And so I bought several feeder rabbits to get me started so I could have rabbit meat. I bought some quail to get me started. And then I just started catching wild starlings because they're just invasive to our area and they're perfectly legal to catch. In fact, they encourage people to kill and catch them. DNR does. And so I catch those. His main diet are those starlings. So he's catching his own rabbits, and I'm getting starlings. So it makes his entire diet free. Just a plus to me. He's
And
my
it's good for the
yeah
ecosystem.
yeah. It's good for it's good for the ecosystem. He's always getting wild game, and it's nice now because now he's like my least expensive animal.
Wow, that's amazing.
Only costs time.
Yeah, obviously you're putting in weekly time, like daily time, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's almost 2 or 3 hours a day
Oh
when
my
I'm
gosh,
working with
wow.
him. Either taking him hunting, I would say it's close to an average of an hour and a half to 2 hours daily, just because there's one day I'll spend like 4 or 5 hours, and the next like 30 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that is an incredible. I knew basically nothing about falconry, and now I feel like I have a crash course. That's what a crazy cool sport, and it's nice to hear the sort of the conservation side and how that works. And because right, if you just listen to how it works off the top, you may not realize how important it could be for the ecosystem to have active falconers in the area.
Oh yeah, and it has been actually very important. The North American uh, peregrine falcon would be extinct today without falconers. So,
Really,
oh yeah, so there were several um, pesticides that were being used. The main one being labeled DDT, and that pesticide would get on, the snakes, the mice, other birds that these peregrine falcons would get and eat. So they'd be eating this pesticide, and it would cause them to be sick, or it would cause their eggshells, which is more common actually. This one is it would cause their eggshells to be so fragile and thin that when the bird would sit on it, the shit it would just break. It would just fall apart. And and so populations started dropping. When I talk to falconers today, they're like 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't seeing peregrine falcons being used in falconry here in the United States was a far off dream, nearly
really?
impossible. Yes. But when they realized that this was happening to the peregrine falcons, and that's why their populations were plummeting, they started capturing peregrine falcons and doing a few things. They started captive breeding programs. The falconers started them. They were sponsored or encouraged by, wildlife resources, but the falconers are the ones who did the work. They would capture and either captive breed. Also, what was more common was they would go up to a nest and they would take the eggs out and they would incubate them themselves, and then hatch, hand rear or hand, imprint these birds and re-release them. And so it helped start growing the population again. Eventually, there were petitions, and um, the use of DDT has since been abolished or gone away with. Now they're using different types of pesticides or other strategies that don't harm, the birds of prey in the area. It was happening to other birds of prey, but for some reason it was just affecting the peregrine falcon so much more. So now peregrine falcon is out of extinction. It's no longer or out of endangerment. It's no longer threatened, and it's also used in falconry. So now all these falconers who are like, this was like a dream, or this is the fantasy to work with this animal. Now there's like a lot of them who have them, and they're like,
Wow.
this is amazing that we can work with and have such a bond and connection with such an amazing animal.
They're like the iconic bird of prey.
Yeah, just because I mean they're the fastest animal in the world. They're incredible. I've had the chance to handle them several times and watch them fly, and they're wicked crazy. They're also extremely moody and can be very mean, and they know it.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, they're super awesome. I think one of my favorite things that another falconer that also runs a podcast that I listen to on occasion. He said, I think we're so drawn to birds of prey because they're like sports cars. They look fast standing still.
They
And
do.
so
Yeah,
and so you look at a bird of prey, they just look like they can go fast, especially like falcons. So
definitely.
I think that's why there's so much of an appeal. I mean, even when you go out today, look at how many logos that are inspired from birds of prey. how many uh, how many birds of prey sculptures you can find in your city. Honestly, birds of prey are literally everywhere, ingrained into our advertising and culture, and as to what they represent. I mean, even the bald eagle is the America's bird, like
Yeah.
country's bird here, and so what's Canada's, by the way? Canada have like a
Yeah, we the Canada goose, I guess, is the
Canada goose.
They
Hey,
can
the
be pretty
geese are
aggressive.
still rad.
Yeah,
You know
they're
what?
not quite as cool.
I've gotten bit more times by a goose than a.
Oh my gosh! If anyone's ever
than
been
birds
near,
of prey.
yeah, geese are insane aggressive. Like you do, like it doesn't take long to learn. Don't go near geese, especially when they're laying eggs. But I mean, but like a bald eagle is such a. I mean, I see them all the time. They're in Canada. We have them all over the place.
You have them more in Canada than we do here. So
yeah, it's not uncommon to see a bald eagle. But every time I'm like, oh, there's an eagle. Let's look at it. Like pull over and look at it. Even though it's like a very common experience, but it's just you're like you said, it's like an iconic species or just birds of prey in general.
Yeah, here we get golden eagles. They can be pretty dangerous, even when flying your own bird. Sometimes golden eagles will come over and catch a falcon bird. Yeah, so there's
because they're very big, right?
They're huge, and golden eagles are jerks, and they like to go after other birds of prey that are either in pursuit, catching, or have caught their prey.
And then they'll eat the bird of prey.
And they'll eat the bird of prey, or they'll eat what the bird of prey caught, and the bird of prey, that falcon or hawk leaves. Golden eagles typically are kind of that secondary hunter. They wait for the other hunters to catch something, and then they steal it, or they eat that bird.
Yeah, that's
so.
Not
whenever
nice.
I've seen a golden eagle out hunting a couple of times, I just immediately grab my bird and I go, "We're done. Let's go home."
Yeah,
I'm not risking
bad guys
it.
are out.
Yeah, and they're amazing, and they are gigantic. Like just wingspan is huge. Whenever you see one of those, incredible.
Yeah, I've never seen one in the wild, but there's one at their local zoo, and it's massive. Just even when its wings are folded, just the size of its body is just incredible.
Yeah, I mean they're anywhere between like 10 to like 13, 14 pounds. I mean, I guess that's all falconry for you, or at least my experience with it so far.
Well, that's it's incredible. I'm so happy you told us that story. Yeah, that's very cool. We've been chatting for over an hour and a half, so we should probably wrap it up. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I like that we were able to cover outside the reptile world as well, because that's one of my goals with the show, and so listening about the birds of prey was really incredible. Can you let everybody know where they can find you and where they can help support? I know you already mentioned the zoo, but just anywhere they can find you online.
Yeah, so all of my stuff is going to be, all of my content is available on the Reptile project. Going to be this logo.
Caiman lizard.
If they're listening, they won't be able to see it, of course. Yeah. But it's a logo of a Caiman lizard, and it's the Reptile project. I post my falconry videos. I post Caiman lizard videos. If you've ever even Googled Caiman lizard, search it on YouTube, I guarantee mine is going to be in one of the top 3s. Clint's reptiles video is probably going to be the very first one. That one's still my Caiman lizard. He borrowed my Caiman lizard for that video.
There you go.
so my lizard is in the top videos.
He's the most famous YouTube.
He's probably the most famous Caiman lizard on YouTube at the moment. I might be one of the only people who consistently make content on Caiman. So definitely look up the Reptile project. I opened up a new channel. If you're really interested in the falconry more specifically, check out the Falconry project. That one's my other channel. Still very small, only like a few dozen subscribers, but I'm literally posting every single video I get onto there. I just didn't want my reptile channel to be overloaded with just birds, because it's at heart a reptile. So, I mean, birds are reptiles too, but that might be a discussion for another time.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jason. I really appreciated this.
Yeah, no problem. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, so same name.
Yes, the Reptile Project on Facebook and Instagram. Mm-hmm. Perfect. And everything, of course, will be in the show notes, so that'll be there.
That's awesome.
And that brings us to the end of the last episode of 2019. So thank you very much for sticking around. Jason, thank you very, very much for sharing all that information with me. That was fantastic. Again, just as a reminder, there will be a 3-week gap between this episode and the next regular episode. However, there will be a bonus episode somewhere in between there. So keep an eye open for that. I'm going to ask you guys help on that one just to help get it out into the reptile world. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And in the meantime, please have a safe and happy holiday and a happy new year. And again, we'll touch base again early January. Thank you very much for CustomReptileHabitats.com for sponsoring this episode. Go check them out. Anything you need reptile related, you're going to find the top quality products on that website. Happy holidays, happy new year, and I will see you guys in 2020.